Welcome to Team All Blacks, a series of reflective interviews of some of the great names of New Zealand's rugby past. Today we talk with Andy Leslie, a player so thrilled to be finally selected for the All Blacks, he didn't hear that he'd also been named captain. Well, Andy Leslie is the first subject of our series for teamallblacks.com for registered viewers of the channel. Andy, of all the players in the last 50 years, you're probably the best example of never giving up hope of making the All Blacks. Your selection came after you'd written home to your wife, in fact, from South Africa on a trip with Petone, that it would be your last tour, but it didn't turn out that way.
No, we come back, having toured Africa, trials were held, and I was selected, and fortunately the concierge who I gave the letter to in Cape Town sent it by surface mail, and it didn't come by air mail. He must have pocketed the few pennies or the few rand for the difference in the price of the postage, and so it come by mail, which was quite fortunate for me.
So it arrived after you'd been selected?
After I'd been selected. I think she got it when we were playing our first game in Australia.
Now there was a bit of a buzz around, wasn't it? There were going to be some changes in the All Blacks, and there was talk that you might come in, but to be named as captain, that was a big surprise. Yeah,
well, you know, I was a perennial trialist, if you like. I'd played an awful lot of trials, and you know, my burning ambition was to play as high as I could at the highest level, and I kept on trying. I played in numerous trials, and I actually got a trial just before the English game, and someone had pulled out, and I remember getting a phone call, will you come up to this trial? And I was sitting in, I wasn't in the starting team, I was in the shed as a reserve. You used to be a reserve for all the teams then. The trial was in Eden Park, and JJ Stewart came in and said, we haven't got a prop reserve, who'll prop? And I put up my hand, we haven't got a lock reserve, you know, who'll lock? And I put up, I said, you know, he said, what's the story? I said, I'll get on anywhere, I just want to have a crack and get on, and any opportunity I get will be brilliant. And from there on, they picked the team for England. And we had the trials a year later at Athletic Park for the tour, and you know, the name was read out there.
Describe your emotions when that happened, because I mean that would have surely blown you.
Well, it did blow us away. I played in so many trials and listened to the teams being announced as they were in those days after the game under the Athletic Park. And if you got an early trial, there would always be one bolter out of the early trials. And so if you got an early trial, you know, you'd be reasonably relaxed that, you know, unless you actually had a blinder, you would be struggling to get selected. And you know, normally when the teams were read out, it was always when it come down to the forwards, AR, and it would be Sutherland. And so, you know, you got used to that. Well, this particular time, the teams were named, and it was AR Leslie, and you know, I didn't hear another name mentioned, and I didn't hear anything else mentioned. Nectar Stevens, Ian, who's my very good friend, was sitting beside me, and Uppy was just behind me. He gave me a kick, Nectar gave me a slap, and you know, well done, congratulations, sort of thing. You've made it. And you know, honestly, I didn't hear that I'd been named captain. That was that, and captain of the team will be AR Leslie or however they did it. I didn't hear that at all. Next minute, Nectar's belting me again. Says, "Geez, you're not only in the team," he said, "you're bloody captain as well." And you know, that's how I heard it. And it was a bolt out of the blue. There was a lot of players who played with Kirky who were pretty upset for Kirky because he never got the whisper, he never got told. I think there was a little slip up there. I don't know the stories you hear afterwards, but you know, in those days it wasn't the custom of telling people that were in or out or whatever. That's become more of a thing now than it was then. You found out by the media or by the announcements. You had no prior knowledge, and so the team was announced in actual fact after Nectar and Uppy, and the guys sitting in my vicinity had finished congratulating me. The first guy up was Kirky, and he congratulated me. Interestingly, we had telegrams in those days. You might have to explain that in some way, Lynn. But you get the and there's a knock on the door the next morning, several telegrams there, and the first one I opened was from actually Ian Kirkpatrick's mum, congratulating me on selection for the All Blacks, and it was just, you know, unbelievable.
So it was a classic case of never giving up, basically.
Oh yeah, you know, you know, you lived the dream, and you wanted to get there, and you know, I put softball to one side at that stage to further my ambitions, if you like, to become an All Black. You know, fingers crossed always, but never hoping too much.
And I understand on that first night you received some great advice from the legendary Charlie Saxton. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, the team was named, and Leslie was down the road in another hotel with a group of friends when she heard it, and finally got in touch with her, and we went down. The team stayed at the Grand Hotel then, and we went in, and next minute Charlie said, I'd like to have a meal with you. I think he might have been president of New Zealand Rugby Union at that stage, and so there was Charlie, Leslie and I sat down, and he then talked me through the whole scenario of being an All Black, being a captain, being a leader, and all this sort of stuff. And he gave me some super advice, and everything he told me, you know, I tried to, you know, I tucked away here, but it certainly all come true at the end. And the advice that he had given was, you know, and that was probably one of the most valuable hour and a halves, however long the dinner took little chats I ever had, and the advice I was given was so, you know, great. And Charlie was
the All Blacks have been through some tough times. They'd lost that series in South Africa and then to the British Lions. Disappointing tour of Britain. Lost to England the year before. You know, so it was time for a change. But JJ Stewart was appointed to get things back on track. Can you tell us a bit about his modus operandi?
Well, you know, like JJ and I never really crossed paths until after that selection, when we sat down and we talked about things and where he was going. And one of the reasons I think which helped my selection was the sort of football that Wellington had adopted after our game against the Lions, when we played them and got hammered, and I think I can still hear the crowd yelling out for 50 points, you know, and they started to cheer the Lions. They played some great rugby, but after that game we went up to the Grand Hotel once again, and we sat upstairs in the little long room across the road from the house bar, and Frank Graham put a dozen beer in the middle of the room and said, "Righto boys, we'll have training tomorrow, we'll sit down, but we're going to, this is the sort of rugby we're going to adopt." And we took what we had learned from that game. I can remember tackling, I think, Barry John in one corner, and they were scoring tries on the other side of the field, and they were wonderful. But we picked everything up, and I think JJ wanted to adopt that sort of football and drive it that way, and that was all the discussions we had. And I remember when we were picked to go to Australia, and JJ saying that this is going to be an absolutely magnificent tour. We're going to be able to sit in the sun, and after every game we're going to analyse things, we're going to do things, we're going to, you know, expand our game. Well, I think every game we played on that tour, it rained. We never sat in the sun once. But, you know, that was where JJ Stewart was taking rugby.
You were a new boy, both as an All Black and a captain, but the All Black brotherhood basically stepped in, particularly in that first test, which was played in atrocious conditions on the Sydney Cricket Ground. Yep,
it certainly did. You know, you can play games. I'd played games for All Blacks, and I think the first game we'd won by a record score or something like that. But there's nothing quite like Test match rugby. It's up another level. Your thinking's, you know, everything's just going on that fast. And I can remember at halftime just come along in a flash. You know, 40 minutes of football, poof, gone in 2 seconds. And at that stage, there was no one. The only message you got was from you know, someone running a message on with a little note or something on a bit of paper. At half time, no coaches come on, you got no advice, you sat there as 15 players. And quite honestly, I was a wee bit lost, and it was Kirky and Brian Williams who just took over, and they just got things lined up, organised with their experiences, in fact, and that got me through my first test, and that was probably the greatest hand I ever had was those two guys at that particular moment.
And Kirky had a particularly strong game that day as well, didn't he?
I never saw Kirky really play a bad game. To me, he was, that game he was outstanding. And I remember people saying, he's reacting because he hasn't got the responsibility. But when you're in a team, and you hear it talked about now, I call it a team, they call it groups today, but it's still a team to me. Everyone in that team, I think we were labelled Dad's Army, but we'd all had 100 games for our provinces. We'd had, there was an awful lot of new boys on wearing an All Black jersey, but old and experienced. And we would, the captains were on the field. I think there was 6 or 7 provincial captains playing for us. So there was all guys who were doing that thinking anyhow. Today it's different because, most guys, they seem to skip the NPC level and go straight to super level, and they learn to play the game there, and so it's a whole different setup. But what we were doing then is what teams are doing now, but we didn't think about it, I suppose.
When the tour was completed, was there a general feeling of satisfaction that you'd achieved what you'd set out to do and got things sort of starting to hum again in an All Black fashion? At
the end of that year, we went on and we played Ireland, was it? So we played Australia and Ireland, 74 for the centennial. And I can remember Hamish MacDonald it was more at the end of the Irish tour because we started off pretty static, and we played the Ireland, Wales and the Barbarians. And I can remember Hamish MacDonald saying to me, he said, Andy, he said, if we could just pack our bags now and just go on touring the world, he said, no team would come close to us because everyone had become pretty insular. Everyone was, just getting on like a house on fire. It was a great group of guys to be around. We had some great characters, and everything was just building. Then sadly, the next year was 75, one test match in the wet against Scotland, the water polo test, and that was the only time we got together that year. And I think that was sad because the team was ready to build to bigger things. Today it would never happen. It would just gone on and built up.
Just going back to the Irish and English tour, if you like, because while it was an amazing last week that you would never even contemplate nowadays, but you played a Welsh 15, which was basically Wales and drag, and the Barbarians team, which I believe was even stronger than the Barbarians team, which had just beaten South Africa.
Yeah, well, they like to think it was because a few of the guys who went, who played for the Barbarians, were guys that didn't tour South Africa, and they brought them in, and they thought it was the genuine Lions side that should have toured, and the game was drawn, which was a wee bit sad. Because I think Bats was cutting off a moustache or something like that in the bath, having said if we go through, if we've won this game, he'll cut it off. And I think he was sitting in the bath in Twickenham, thinking that we'd won the game. We'd only drawn it.
Throughout this time, South Africa was an elephant in the room, if you like, throughout rugby. There'd been the 70 tour, there'd been the cancellation in 73, there'd been the ongoing controversies about it. You toured with Petone and also played in the World Championships with, I believe, there was the South African team playing as well in softball.
Yep.
So what was your attitude to the situation, and what was the attitude of the guys in those days?
Well, no one agreed with the policies of South Africa, but we were of the opinion that bridge building was, I think, was the right way to go. And we took that course. We went down that road, and I think to this day, the biggest supporting group in South Africa are the Coloureds, who support. They all wear All Black jerseys, and they all support. And the friendships that was built between those people. So I think we had some sort of influence. We had a lot of influence in, the bridge building, if you like, and the actual amalgamation of the abolishment of apartheid as we know it.
Just before we talk about the rugby on that 76 tour, what was your impression of what you saw in South Africa once you had the chance to, I mean, well, you've been there with Petone, but then a couple of years later as well. What were your thoughts on seeing the actual situation?
Oh, like the poverty, I've never seen anything like it, or other than being in Mexico. When we went there for a softball series, people living in shanty towns. Mexico and South Africa were just so similar. It didn't matter the way people were treated and let live and all that sort of stuff. I think it shocked all of us, and it was. We found that very hard to grasp. But one of the hardest thing we found to grasp was the Olympic Games were on at the same time, and Mauritius had led the walkout of the Olympic Games. About our involvement in South Africa. Yet, while we were there was a Mauritius volley team playing against South Africa in South Africa. So, there's a lot of double standards around. But we did what we did, and I think we go back there now, and I've got letters to say that thanks very much for coming, and you contributed.
The rugby itself was another story. You started brilliantly with up to the first test, all those outstanding performances, but like a lot of New Zealand teams, that first test is a real cruncher, isn't it?
Yeah, the question I get asked most, what about that ball that rolled around the post? I think if I'd scored that try, and there was another incident later on in the game, if we hadn't have been penalised there, if we'd come away, if we'd won that test, I think we would have had a far better chance, because South Africa had a tendency to do a lot of changes in teams with their selection panel, and that they weren't very stable. But that wasn't to be. They were stable. They went on. They won the series. But there were one or two calls that we thought we were pretty hard done by. But at the end of the day, they were the calls that were made. People still complain about them, don't they?
Do you lose any sleep over it at all, or is it water under the bridge?
Water under the bridge now. I think the greatest team that ever left our country was the 1970 rugby team with Brian Lahore and their team, and they were a magnificent side, and they would have experienced the same situations as we did.
But there were high points, of course. That second test to come back, and particularly, I think a lot of younger people will remember Joe Morgan's try, which sort of set things alive. And I think Kirky scored a try in that game.
Yeah, and Bolin Kutsy's being tackled in the corner. But interestingly, my reaction after that game wasn't one of joy. I think I can remember coming off the ground and actually vomiting through, release and that sort of stuff. It was, we've won the game, we're still in the series, and right up until the 75th minute of the last test, we were still in there with an opportunity to draw it.
And then, of course, brought forward the question of possible penalty tries.
Oh, yeah. I've got a little saying, which isn't suitable for this program, but that's gone and by now.
But you felt they were too.
Oh, without doubt, and I think JJ said the same, but
And then, of course, partway through the tour, I believe you learnt as well that New Zealand Rugby Union, the NZRFU at the time, had turned down the chance to have neutral refereeing. Yeah,
as we understand it, the New Zealand Rugby Union had the opportunity for neutral referees, and we chose to go with what they had. And I can remember Noel Stanley to this day trying to get the panel changed and get it. It was the makeup of the panel that disturbed us more than anything, But that was all right at the end of the day.
One test we haven't talked about there, which I would like to just go back to if we can, was the Scottish test in 1975, the water polo test, as it's become known as. What was the weather like that day?
Unbelievable. We didn't realise it was so bad until we actually got out to the ground and had a look at the ground, and it was getting more and more underwater. We didn't really, at any stage, the Scottish team were having team discussions about cancelling it. It never went into our dressing room at all. It was JJ and myself were having the discussion with the referee, and the game was going to go ahead. They were flying out the next day. There wasn't going to be on the next day. That was never a consideration, and it was just we went out and we played the game. We didn't talk about the conditions at all. And when Hamish McDonald jet boated for the try. There's no other explanation for it. For that try, you know, with the weight coming off and people just about, you know, being submerged in rucks and that, it was a wonderful experience.
You've had, you know, in that 3 years that you were captain of the side, you packed a lot into it. Are there any specific memories that stand out?
There's, I think the memories you remember most are the friendships you make. You know, we used to socialise with the teams afterwards. We used to have some of those dreadful dinners they used to talk about. But that, you know, it all gave us the opportunity to rub shoulders and mix. And to this day, you know, you can go overseas and you can meet up with people and friends you've met. Your paths may never cross again, but you know, you're still friends.
You finished with the All Blacks at that stage, but you had another season. No, you didn't.
Yep. In 1976, I retired. We'd been away for 3.5 months, and it was time then to settle down and earn a living, if you like. You know, $2.50 a day didn't go far. And, you know, if it wasn't for your rugby club having a collection of that, you know, there was no wages coming into the house or anything like that. But that's what we all experienced in those days. And, you know, I'd have never swapped it in a lifetime. You know, I'd still do exactly the same to get the experiences I had.
But you didn't end your ties with rugby. You coached Petone and then moved on to coach Wellington. What, in your coaching technique or style, how much of it was a lesson of what you'd learned playing the game?
I played with some, you know, great guys and great coaches, and I worked with Bob Scott, who was used to pull a game apart, you know, bit by bit by bit, very similar to Bill Freeman, who were great guys at dissecting games, talking about your weaknesses and strengths and all that sort of stuff. They built your skills of your game. And then you had guys like Frank Ryan and J.J. Stewart, who had a wee bit of a different philosophy. They let players flourish and rather than controlling players. So you play with a great cross section of people, then you learn off the people. And one of the things I always got taught is don't believe, you know, Bob Scott used to say it to me, don't believe what I say, go out and try it. If it works for you, do it. If it doesn't, put it aside, but never let it go from you, you know, what's up there in the top 3 inches. And that goes for, you know, for anybody playing sport, any sport. You know, lots of people have got a lot to offer. Listen, don't discard it, try it. If it works for you, use it.
You mentioned the $2.50 a day as your player's allowance. Could you ever have imagined where rugby would be now when you were back in those days?
Yeah, well, you know, my father was a professional soccer player, and he always thought, you know, like, he always had the attitude that you approach everything professionally, and the opportunity, if you ever got the opportunity to go and earn a living from it, you know, go and do it. It's because it's your trade, it's what you enjoy. And I think Dad, as a professional soccer player, was earning £20 a week. So, you know, when you see what the football players are earning today, millions, and then when you see what the rugby players are earning today, but I think that, you know, that's wonderful. You know, I think it's great. And, you know, I got different opportunities. I got opportunities to go into business. I got an opportunity to lead rugby tours. I got opportunities, you know, so, you know, I've done rugby's given me heaps.
In terms of, just as an observer, and you've served as president of the New Zealand Rugby Union, how do you see the game now? I find
it difficult to absorb everything. The things I find hard, the most is the involvement of the referee. I can remember Peter McDavitt getting told off by the then chairman of the New Zealand Rugby Union. Slipped my mind. I'll think of it in a minute. You know, he was telling a team to get back, backs to get back behind the mark, and he got blown up by, you know, saying, you know, you're just there to adjudicate things and make sure that no team gets an unfair advantage. And, you know, that was Peter put in his place. He wasn't to move back. Now the referee just about controls the game.
Is that the only concern you've got? Or
oh, you know, but I think, you know, that's the game's become very defensive. It's become very physical. You know, I don't know what position I'd be playing today. I was only 13 and a half, 14 stone playing the game, Halfbacks are bigger and stronger than me now, so I'd probably be a water boy or an interviewer or a cameraman.
But is it still a great game?
Oh yeah, I think when you see rugby played well, when you see all the skills and that are in the game, and where Steve Hansen and that are taking it, I think it's great. I get frustrated with games that go from set piece to set piece, and that's where the difficulty appears to be, at the scrum time and getting the ball straight into the line out and all that sort of thing. But when the game is, you see two good teams competing and playing an open sort of a game, you see what Jamie Josephs has done with the Highlanders, where they don't play from set piece to set piece, they'll create positions around the paddock to play off. And that's no different to what the Highlanders did 10 years ago, or what Wellington did 20 years ago, or what Auckland did, So, everyone's, there's the old story, he's only good, the only thing that guy's good for is scoring tries, but what else do you want him on the paddock for? Score tries, eh?
And in your career, you played a lot of test matches, which a lot of people would think was sort of, had no cause, if you like, or nothing resting on them, apart from the series victory. But now with the World Cup, has that altered the way rugby?
Yeah, I'm sure it's there's a cycle now. Our cycle used to be South Africa, I think. Our World Cup was South Africa, New Zealand, and we used to play them. They'd come here every 4 years. We'd go there every 4 years. So our cycle was South Africa, and then you'd play the tours of, you'd go to England and that. But our World Cup was always South Africa, and so our series against South Africa has been replaced, if you like, by the World Cup, and so it's a 4-year cycle now. So it hasn't changed that much, but.
And the old challenges are still there, aren't they? That means still South Africa, but Australia have come through.
So it's great, and what we dearly want is like Shivers. Do you think if America grasped the game? We've been saying this for how long now? 20, 25 years. Geez, if America get into the game, well, America are getting into the game. They've been successful at sevens. They've they've won a couple of tournaments. They're getting more involved with the game. Look what's happened in football with America's involvement. So, what we want is more stronger teams and teams playing to their ultimate, so they can be a challenge.